Welcome to HurricaneCenterLive.com. I'm Alex Garcia, Director of the National Tropical Weather Conference and Executive Producer of these programs. These programs are made possible by USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, and Plylocks Hurricane Clips. These programs are also a team effort with Bill Reed, the former Director of the National Hurricane Center, and Tim Smith, Chief Meteorologist of KRGV-TV. And now, here's Tim Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Live. We are glad to have you along with us this morning in another one. I think has been a long line of fascinating presentations. I think today is going to be yet another great presentation from Tim Marshall, which we'll get to in just a moment. As Alex mentioned, we want to thank all of our sponsors. Of course, USAA, we appreciate everything they do and help getting people ready for storms and helping for after the storms pass. South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the home of the National Tropical Weather Conference. Most years, of course, this year it's all been virtual, but they've been along anyway, and we appreciate everything they do. South Padre Island is open for business, and they encourage you to stop by if you can. Social distancing is not only encouraged, but enforced on the beaches. You can only have one pole umbrellas, no tents or anything else, and those umbrellas have to be 15 feet apart on the beach. All kinds of rules that are enforced, but they are open, so they encourage you to come on by. And Plylocks Hurricane Clips, the maker of these guys right here, these little things that go on your plywood, looks just like this. Put them on the plywood, you slide it in the window before the hurricane. Afterwards, you pop these little clips and pull it back out. And in most storms, it will keep your windows safer than had you not had them on there. So we appreciate that, folks at Plylocks, for being part of the program. Bill Reed has been, every time we do this, it seems like, hey, we should get an update on what's happening today in the tropics, because every time we do this, there's something happening in the tropics. So, Bill, let's start with that, and then you can introduce our speaker. Good morning, Bill Reed.
Hey, Tim, thank you very much. Yeah, when we started this out this summer, I said probably have a couple of our shows where I'll have to say something. I had no idea it would be every one. Yesterday was an eventful day over on the north coast of the Gulf of Mexico when Hurricane Sally moved inland after a 36-hour, 2-mile-an-hour crawl towards the coast. And for the 5th straight season now, we've had a tropical event produce more than 2 feet of rain somewhere in the USA. Very interesting consequence of slow-moving storms. Now let's see what's going on today. Try this. Picture up there, guys?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, got the wrong one, of course. Let me go over here. All right, should be a satellite loop there. Just a quick overview. Swirl up North Atlantic is the post-tropical version of Paulette. It merged with a cold front yesterday, and it may actually resurface somewhere down the Azores in the blocky pattern over there, but that's not something to worry about in the near term. Vicky doesn't look like it's going to be long for the tropical storm world. It's still circulating, but the convection is very limited. There's an outlook area that came off of Africa 2 days ago that hasn't shown much more sign of development. And there's also another wave getting ready to come off Africa that the models as yet haven't picked up much on. This beast here is a classic open Atlantic peak of hurricane season storm. It's a large storm in area. It's a category 2 level last I looked, and forecast to become a major hurricane. Unfortunately, the track takes it in about 4 or 5 days in the vicinity of Bermuda, which was just hit by Paulette. Hopefully that'll change somewhat if we get some luck in the models. Remnants of Sally are now entering the Carolinas and spreading rain in there, but nothing like what fell yesterday along the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and the Florida Panhandle. Of more interest to those of us on this side of the pond is this suspicious looking area down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico, part of the Bay of Campeche. The hurricane hunters are going to fly it this afternoon. The Hurricane Center gives it a 90% chance of developing. And it looks pretty good. Looking at the observations, there's probably 1,007 millibar low somewhere on the eastern side of the ball of convection, watching how the wind shifted at a buoy that was just out here within the last couple of hours. Outflow is very good both to the northeast and to the southwest. Maybe a little bit of constriction going on the west side, but not much. So I think the favorable development is a correct sign. And just showing these because I have nothing else to show on the storm, but without a clearly defined system, there's usually some suspicions about the veracity of the model forecasts that we get. But they do actually show a very consistent slow northeastward trend for several days, then bend back towards Tim Smith's home as we get into the early to middle part of next week. There's a cold front going to come off the Texas coast early this weekend, stall somewhere down in this area with high pressure building behind it and low pressure developing before. We're going to get an increased pressure gradient and stronger northeast to east winds along the upper coast and north to northeast winds along the lower coast. And we're going to be back in that elevated tide and beach erosion condition that we've seen several times this summer. Okay, I'll stop sharing here. And fresh back from chasing in Hurricane Sally and looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, our speaker this morning I first met in the 1980s when I was a forecaster at Fort Worth, and had the pleasure of doing a tornado chase with Tim up into the Texas Panhandle the Memorial Day weekend of 1987. We saw 7 tornadoes that day, some of them illuminated by lightning. That was quite an experience, and I really enjoyed that. Tim has a unique combination of education degrees in meteorology and civil engineering, where he went to Northern Illinois as an undergraduate and Texas Tech as a graduate student. And he took that merger of talents and became one of the experts in assessing wind damage in his long distinguished career with Hague Engineering. He's now down to part-time engineering and full-time storm chasing. So with that, Tim, I'm going to let you tell us all about your experiences with Hurricane Laura and anything else you want to talk about.
All right, Bill. Welcome, gang. Welcome to those online. Yeah, well, I just got back, so I'm going to be a little bit on the nebulous side, as it was quite the drive from Gulf Shores to home yesterday. Of course, I did a survey in the morning, and I didn't get out of there until about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So you can just imagine how long and painful that drive was. I went by myself down there and met, of course, many chasers, fellow chasers down there. It's just sort of a social gathering to see so many of us who are interested in the strong winds. We just cannot get enough of strong winds. So it's been hurricane number 2 this year. And Sally was actually more impressive to me from a standpoint that I wasn't expecting very much. It was forecast to be a minimal hurricane, and I was really debating for a long time on whether I should go down there, but I'm very glad I did, because as you know, it intensified a little bit before it came on shore, and it was nice to see that. It was wind gusts about 100 miles an hour, and did a real number on trees and power lines. So most of south parts of the coast area are without power and will be without power for a very long time. And the surge came up, it was moderate, enough to flood parts of Gulf Shores and Orange Beach, so that really getting around was very difficult to do. And then, of course, parts of 59 were flooded down to Foley from Loxley, and power lines were down. So travel was still treacherous yesterday.
Tell us a little bit about those poles that you were talking about, the power line poles. Those were kind of interesting story.
You know, every time I do something like this, I learn. And that's what really makes it for me. So I saw all these light poles that are down, and I'm currently writing a light pole standard at the EF scale. And I said, well, this is very odd. I see a lot of them snapped at the ground, and they were painted aluminum. I thought initially they were aluminum until I got a closer look, and they were not aluminum at all. They were a composite resin fiberglass pole, and a lot of them were snapped at the base. And this is, to me, a cheaper alternative than an aluminum pole. Aluminum is far better, I think, and did quite well in parts of Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, and other areas. So that was a learning experience for me because I had not really documented composite poles before. And this was a great example. So here you go. Another good case study for me to have great information acquired about how did these composite poles perform during what I would call a lower end hurricane. And it did quite poorly, those poles, compared to their counterparts, which are the aluminum or even wood poles did better.
Compare what you saw in Sally with what you saw a couple of weeks earlier with Laura on the other side of Louisiana, basically.
Now, there in Laura, Lake Charles area, they had the design of hurricane force winds in mind when it came to like traffic lights. Something that I documented again that I hadn't seen before was the fact that they had hundreds of traffic light poles that would actually swivel or pivot and vane in the wind. So this saved the poles. What a wonderful idea, and what a wonderful way to be hurricane resistant. And now all they have to do is swing those poles back, tighten down a little bit, and get the power back on, and they're back in business. So they saved lots of money by having these poles that actually swing in vane with the wind. It's a wonderful idea. I wish I could see more of that in hurricane-prone zones, thinking about what the wind will do. Because, you know, as we all say, it's not a question of if a hurricane's ever going to hit your coastal community, but when will it? And they had their design built in. It was wonderful to see there in Lake Charles. Unfortunately, Lake Charles has, of course, lots of trees and power lines down, and it'll be weeks before they get power restored.
When you're looking for a place to ride out a storm, you know, you've ridden out Laura and Sandy in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and you've been through many more in the past. What do you look for? Where do you want to be? How close to the ocean's edge do you want to be? And what do you do for protection?
Well, hurricane chasing is like tornado chasing. It involves a strategy. You have to plan. And what I do is I look at Google aerial imagery and I find where all the parking garages are, especially if it's a stronger hurricane like Laura. So I had picked out 5 parking garages, and I got to the coast, got to Lake Charles area early enough to scout out those parking garages. Well, the first one I went to was like the Isla Capri Casino. And that parking garage was fine. It was open. However, it was right across from a gravel storage facility. They had 3 conical shaped piles of different sized stones. Oh, that would be perfect in a hurricane, wouldn't it? To be blasted by gravel, wind-driven gravel from these 3 piles. So that, I said, was out. Then I went downtown, and there was this bank building right downtown, and it is a glass facade building with a beautiful parking garage right next door. And I said, do I want to ride out this hurricane right next to all this glass? And I said, no. So then I went to another option, which was the St. Patrick's Hospital there, which had a 5-story parking garage. Hey, it's a hospital. What better place to be, right? They're operating. They have a generator. And they were kind enough to allow me to ride it out on the top floor. And I was above all the other houses and trees. I had phenomenal view downtown, Lake Charles to the north. It was really an ideal location to ride it out. The only, I guess, less than ideal thing was that it's in the middle of a residential neighborhood with a lot of trees and power lines, and it was difficult to get out of there the next morning. But I'll tell you, it was still a wonderful place to be. So yeah, I pick out parking garages, typically do my homework. In Sally, there are several hotels and condominiums along the beach of Gulf Shores, and that's a great place to ride it out. The only question I had there was the storm surge. You know, the storm surge comes in and floods, and cars don't do well in storm surge. So And then I heard that they were going to close and shut down the island and not let anybody out. I mean, after a certain time, they would not let anybody leave that island. So I managed to hear about that and get out of there into Foley, which is north of the International Causeway Bridge. And that's where I was. But the hurricane was not as strong as Laura in terms of wind, and the surge was not as great as like past hurricanes that I've been in, like Ivan. Ivan was a phenomenal hurricane, and I rode that out in Warrington, which is actually just south of west of the city at the Naval Air Station there. And that was a phenomenal hurricane for me. But again, all these hurricanes are at night. Now, I don't know why this is happening, but I would like to get one during the day.
Yeah, the only hurricane that I can remember that was a day event for me was Hurricane Allen. Came through. And the things you see down there, there's been a lot of speakers at meetings I've been to that have shown how we've made improvements on our structures, our building codes, and things like that. Do you concur with that? And a secondary part of that same question is where do you think we're falling short and could be shore up without spending a fortune?
A great surprise for me in aftermath of Hurricane Laura was the performance of some manufactured homes. Now, everybody thinks, oh my gosh, manufactured homes, they don't usually do too well in the wind. But there were some manufactured home parks that I toured after the hurricane that did quite well. They were anchored down with the frame ties as well as over the top ties, and outside of maybe some vinyl siding damage and some shingle damage, those homes remained intact. And that was a great surprise in some of the larger manufactured home parks to me. And it shows that, heck, if you can make a manufactured home survive these category 3 and 4 hurricanes, then you should be able to make your own house survive. It's not out of the question. Down in the Gulf Shores from Sally and Orange Beach, of course, a lot of those houses were built with hurricane resistance in mind and did quite well. Metal roofs that were attached properly did fine. People did use some shutters and impact resistant windows, but balconies had roof overhangs that were tied down. So yeah, I think we're learning here, Bill, after how many years? And it's a matter of getting everybody to do. But, Mother Nature kind of weeds out the weak. So eventually we hope that over the next 100 or so years, if people can at least build away from the coast, that they can build properly and survive these things. It's possible to survive.
That's good. The impact windows, have they been performing like you'd expect them to in the storms you've surveyed?
Yes, impact resistant windows have been performing quite well. Of course, they can break, but they won't lose their integrity. So to be able to keep their integrity, and there's standards that we test for that. We have various kinds of cannons that we can shoot boards like 2x4 at, and you can break the window, sure, but it remains intact. That's the beauty of it, and that's why I like impact-resistant glass. It's not really a total substitute for shutters. I like a good steel shutter. That, to me, is the ultimate, because who wants broken windows and have to pick up all that stuff afterwards? So shutters are a great idea. Way to go.
Yeah, they're expensive, the impact windows. That's what I tell people. I would still shutter if I had them. I don't have them on this house. They weren't required. No one was offering them, but I would have had them and still would have put shutters on them to protect the cost.
Yeah, because as you know, flying debris is one of the big culprits of causing a lot of damage. And if you break a window and wind can get in, now you have internal pressures to deal with. And that can actually double or more the upward loads on a roof. So you want to prevent the wind from getting in. That is a key. And it doesn't matter if it's a window or a door or garage door or a roll-up door. You want to make sure that those things don't fail and you do not allow wind to enter.
Yeah, it reminds me of a question I also had on there. after Andrew, there was a concerted effort to improve the integrity of garage doors. I saw examples of both successes and failures being shown by people down in Port Aransas area after Harvey. Anything you can add to what to look for in a garage door?
Well, garage doors have wind ratings. Did you know that? There are certain ratings for garage doors. Now, of course, I'm up away from the coast, so my door is a pretty standard door. But if you live near the coast, definitely get a wind-rated garage door. FEMA also has some great information. You can get a hold of FEMA.gov/library. Great information there on how to fortify your garage door and prevent the wind from getting in. And it involves either putting some girts, which are horizontal members, to strengthen that door, to all the way to putting a frame wall behind that door in advance or preparing for the hurricane, because you do not want to lose your garage door in a hurricane. And they are one of the most susceptible to damage in a hurricane.
Very good. Tim, you got anything?
Yeah, define near the coast. When you say if you live near the coast, you're fortifying things and your surveys over time. How far inland does the severe damage continue, and how far inland do we need to fortify?
That's a great question. You know, in the case of like Sally, where it's moving at 2 or 3 miles an hour, the damage is confined within about 50 miles of the coast there. But you know, I remember back in my youngin' days, a Hurricane Hugo that was actually moving at a pretty good clip. And there was pretty good damage all the way from the Charleston area on up to Charlotte, North Carolina. So, and that's wind damage I'm talking about. So it shows you that depending on the forward speed of the hurricane, it could be anywhere from a few miles to a few hundred miles from the coast. Just because you think you live in Charlotte, North Carolina, doesn't mean that you can't get some pretty good winds there from a remnant hurricane.
We're talking about, Hurricane Hannah, and I live about 70 miles inland from the Gulf Coast, and I worked through the storm, of course. But afterwards, my wife said, "I wish you would have put the plywood on the windows before you went to work," even though we're 70 miles inland and it was not a major storm. Just because of the stuff blowing around in the yard, she would have felt more comfortable having some kind of window coverings, even 70 miles inland. So I think that's a good point, and it could be a lot more than 70.
Absolutely, yeah. What were some of the wind gusts there in Hannah, in your area?
We had gusts to about 60 this far inland. It was sustained at about 40 for a prolonged period of time because it was moving so slowly, and that was the trick, was the slow movement of it, and it fell apart. But the persistence of the wind was the issue, much like what they've seen in the southeast because of Sally.
Yeah, so there's sort of this kind of Goldilocks kind of scenario where, well, the people at the coast, they know a hurricane's coming. They're in preparation mode. They get their things in order. But then if you're 20, 30, 40 miles away from the coast, you kind of get this complacency and go, it's going to only hit the coast and that sort of thing. And just simple things, stuff that you have in your yard, everything from garbage cans to gravel around the house that you have, or play toys around there. They can fly and they can break a window. And so it's just a matter of look around, see what may do some damage. Another thing see this a lot are trees, especially pine trees. Pine trees act as a windbreak. They do help slow the wind, but they also break in the wind. So a pine tree coming down can do extreme damage to a house. I've seen where they just literally cut a house in half. And I saw that in Laura, where there were a couple of those, and including manufactured homes, where they just slice the home in half. So although trees are great to have on your property, it's just if they're close to the house, they can really come in and damage your house severely.
A couple of good questions coming in online now. Casper's asking, are some of these impact window tests occurring at the Wall of Wind testing facility down at Florida International?
Good question. I'm not sure if they have tested recently some of the impact resistant windows. I know there are several facilities out there that do that, and I've actually been to a couple of them out on the East Coast. There was one in Miami, and there's one in South Carolina that they do test with wind, various components of buildings, but certainly check on that, check the information. If you're going to order an impact resistant window, there are different kinds out there and different ratings.
Yeah, same goes for there's all kinds of shutters you can buy, and I only looked at the ones that could provide a certificate that they had passed certain standards in Florida or the Texas Tech standards, and they can get those certifications.
Yeah, I'm not familiar too much with the films that go over windows and how impact resistant those are. I'm more have seen the actual window itself impact resistant. So I'd be interested to know if anybody has heard of anything about the films that are applied to windows and whether or not they have anything to do with strength.
The general impression is that they can't pass the standards. They do some at the lower end, but if you're wanting to protect from I forgot what the wind speed was, but it was way too low to satisfy my needs, because that would be an inexpensive way if it was successful.
Yeah, Haskell was just asking a question about that, about the 3M 8 mil security film, but research is still out on that, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I would have to do some research on that. It doesn't strike me as something that would be as good as a normal impact resistant window. There's anything you do, it will help, except for masking tape. Do not put X's on your windows, because that to me does absolutely nothing except make the manufacturers of the masking tape wealthy. But it's like, do not put masking tape X's on your windows. It does not enhance the impact resistance of those windows.
Leaves a sticky residue.
Yeah, you spend the next 3 weeks cleaning your windows after the storm if it didn't hit.
Yeah. Andy wants to know, Tim, did you investigate the remnants of Olga, the damage to the Tennessee River Valley from last year? It was a hybrid system that caused nearly 250-mile damage path.
I did not get to Tennessee for that. I investigate tornadoes. I was in Chattanooga for a tornado outbreak that happened a couple of years ago, but I had not been there for Olga. So I'm interested in all kinds of storms, of course, that actually do damage. I've been so busy, though, with other things, I haven't even gotten to the derecho in Iowa. And our folks up there in our offices up there are super busy right now with work from that derecho. Quite the event.
I got an interesting question. I don't know the answer for the stated design wind load for the WSR-88D radar is 135 mile an hour. The radar dome disintegrated, thus ending the life of the current Lake Charles radar right as the eye wall came over there. What kind of winds would do that if it's rated at 135 miles an hour and yet it blew away?
Well, we always deal with failure in terms of probabilities. Failure. So if something is rated for 135, it should obviously survive 135. The fact that it's gone doesn't necessarily mean the winds were 135, because if you think about a probabilistic distribution where the mean is actually 135, you could get a failure below the mean, and maybe there was a problem with the attachment, and it only takes 1 weak link in something like that to get catastrophic failure. So I'd be kind of interested to know some of the details about that. But keep in mind that when something is rated for 135, there's a thing called a safety factor that's out here, and it should be able to survive not only 135, but maybe even 145 or a little higher than that. It's just things happen. I mean, I don't know how old the dome was. I don't know the attachments on how it was anchored. So those are all keys, and you can fail something lower than its rating if you have some inherent kinds of issues.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was an 88D, same radar over in Taiwan that a typhoon took off, and they determined the failure there was the bolts weren't strong enough to hold the dome on.
Okay.
They didn't know what the wind speed was anyway, but that's where it didn't collapse the dome itself, but the bolts were sheared off.
What are some of the more unusual things you found in your storm surveys, whether it's Laura, Sally, or any prior surveys that you just go, oh, didn't expect to see that?
Well, doing surveys is an educational opportunity for me. I still learn, even after all these years and many dozens of hurricanes that I've been through and surveyed, I'm still learning, and I enjoy that. So when I see something that has failed, I try to figure it out. That's what I do. The vast majority of the time, it's because something wasn't attached properly and the wind just takes advantage of it. I mean, the wind's going to seek out a weak link and exploit that. But every once in a while, there's certain things that bog my mind. Like for Laura, the loss of all those windows in that Bank 1 tower is certainly needs to be looked at, because they had some loss in Rita, as I recall. That here we have catastrophic failures. Whenever there's catastrophic failures, this is a chance to learn, folks. This is how we try to make a difference, try to learn about these catastrophic failures so that they will not happen again. I heard about a bridge segment that failed from this Sally in Pensacola. Well, in I-10 had bridge problems in Ivan too. And it's like, this is a chance to learn. Now in Mississippi, they did learn. And after Katrina went through, they decided to build a lot of those main bridges. And I'm talking about, the one from Biloxi to Ocean Springs, really higher and much, much stronger. And that's the way to do it. If you want to beat a hurricane, you need to learn about how to resist both the wind and the water. And that's the things that I think are important here, is whenever we come across these catastrophic failures, yeah, they're puzzling until we look at it closely, and usually we can figure it out.
It's really a detective job that you're doing there, searching for clues and then coming up with a probable cause.
Exactly. I mean, the damage is actually the evidence left behind after Mother Nature's doing. So this helps us in learning about it. I mean, a lot of people see, oh, this was destroyed. Well, that's maybe true, but there are things in a pile of debris. For example, if a masonry wall falls, I'm looking for things like a bond beam, which is that type of beam across the top of a wall. See how it was connected, if it had any rebar in it, what kind of rebar it may have had. So those kinds of things I'm looking at. If a brick wall fails and it's just a pile of brick, I'm looking for brick ties, see if they had any kind of corrosion maybe on the ties. So this is evidence for us, and we can go in before the cleanup, and that's why I want to get in as quick as possible before cleanup, is to see this evidence and try to document. Is this something that we've seen before, or is this something totally new and we need to really maybe publish this, get somebody's attention about it?
Yeah, I assume you've, over the years, you've worked pretty closely with the insurance industry. A lot of people down here are screaming about their very high windstorm rates, that they're being robbed on that. I tend to disagree, but you may have some more knowledge of how that's come about, to whether it's legit or not.
Well, we all pay for the damage and destruction, and insurance companies, in the short term, yeah, they will pay you for and reimburse you for your damage, but they have to make money, so they're going to charge a premium for it. And the more difficult it is for them to make money, the higher your premium is going to get. So I know that some of my friends who live in Florida pay twice or three times what I do in terms of insurance rates. Now, we live in the same kind of house, and our houses are valued about the same. So why are they paying 2 or 3 times more than I do Well, it's because of the risk. Their risk of getting damage is much greater than my risk. I'm not going to get hit by a hurricane. I mean, tornadoes, but tornadoes are much lower risk than a hurricane along the coast. And Florida, as you know, sticks out like a sore thumb there. And so its chances of getting hit with a hurricane are pretty high from year to year. And a lot of people like to live near the coast. It's amazing to see the amount of building. I mean, I've been around doing this for about 45 years. And the amount of growth I've seen from Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, down to places like the Jupiter and Marco Island and all those, I'm just amazed to me at how the building and development has happened over 45 years. I mean, Marco Island was just a swamp back then, and now it's full of condos, and it's like, it's just sitting out there waiting to get hit.
Yeah, that whole Southwest Florida, my first experience going down there was in the early 1970s, and there were well separated post-World War II small communities dotting the coastline all the way down south of Fort Myers. Now it's just it's total development now all the way down to Marco, and all of that is in a surge zone.
Yeah, in fact, during Irma, I decided not to go out on Marco with several of my friends down there, but I went to where in Naples. In Naples, I decided to ride it out there, right at the elbow of where 75 curves there, and that's where I rode or met Irma out there, and that was a daytime. But Irma, of course, was hurt quite badly with the coast interaction with Cuba. So it's a good thing that it did that, but it certainly did some damage to especially some of the roofs that we saw and pool enclosures and that. But it could have been far worse had it not interacted with Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our speakers pointed out, I apologize, I don't remember who it was, that these are not natural disasters at all. They've been here for forever. And us putting houses and buildings in front of them is what the man-made aspect of this is what makes it, more of almost a man-made disaster more than a natural disaster in many of these cases.
Yeah, so going back to why do you pay so much in insurance, it's because of that risk, because of all the people that want to be near the coast and experience the beauty of the beach that have to pay for that living in paradise.
Yeah, that's what I tell them. They're not happy when I tell them that answer, but you're exactly right.
Got a question from Andy. He wants to know what the typical wind speed rating of large transmission line towers is.
Towers come in, these are the truss towers. We're talking about the tapered towers that distribute power. They have various ratings. Most of them are in the 110 to 130 range, but they're gust sensitive, of course, especially, of course, they have the cables, the conductors attached to them, and they need to have those with dampers on them so that they do not whip around in the wind, because that puts a tremendous amount of load on the tower itself. So I'm going to say 110, 130. And again, it's a probabilistic distribution. There are some towers that will fail earlier than that because of maybe some debris that gets caught in the lines, or just maybe age. Some rust gets a hold of. These are made of galvanized steel typically. So maybe age has a factor of it. So there's a number of things probabilistically that can occur to bring down towers below that. But for the most part, 110 to 130.
Casper's asking, what's the worst hurricane damage assessment you've seen in your 45 years of work?
Well, I'm going to have to vote for Andrew on that. Andrew was the worst hurricane destruction I have seen, and it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of that the winds were strong in Andrew, but also the codes were rather weak in that time period. I don't know if we'll ever see that level of destruction again. I hope not. But manufactured home parks were just shredded, and there were subdivisions that were put up pretty quickly down there that failed miserably, had a lot of code issues and poor building practices. And that's what added to the destruction. So there's a combination factor here. The 1-2 punch for Andrew was the wind and the poor building that I saw. And also, Andrew did have a surge. A lot of people don't realize that it had at least a 18, 20-foot surge. We saw large boats actually moved onshore quite the distance because of its surge. So I think I would have to vote for Andrew in terms of my inspections and my surveying. And I've done this now. Bill mentioned Hurricane Allen in 1980. That was my first hurricane, both experiencing it. I was in Corpus Christi and also in surveying, doing the damage survey, went to Port Mansfield afterwards, down to Brownsville. And so ever since then, I had the hurricane bug, and I knew that I needed to write out as many of these things as I possibly can and have done so. And they're all different. I mean, each one of these, like Sally, very slow moving hurricane, kind of north eye wall. Laura being, a wonderful circular eye wall and, relatively fast moving. So these hurricanes, they're not all the same by any means, different sizes. I mean, look at the size of Allen. Hurricane Allen took up the whole Gulf in terms of its cirrus shield. It was amazing, gigantic size. And Camille was, even though I didn't chase it, was a little too young then, was a tiny but very impactful storm. I've seen some of the satellite images, and at least it was the same thing, a little tiny, but very powerful nonetheless. So hurricanes come in various sizes and shapes. It's been a joy having this thing called a hurricane on planet Earth that I can chase them.
Yeah, it's interesting because they also, for those of us in the trying to get the public to act and warn on, that's one of the difficult challenges is depending on what hurricane someone previously experienced, they're going to base their response for the next one on what happened to them then, and it's not going to be the same. And it's sometimes hard to get through to people that this is going to be a worse storm, for example.
I have to think that one of the more challenging jobs in the profession is be a forecaster for the National Hurricane Center, to try to figure out where these storms are going to go, let alone what intensity they might be when they get there. So for like Irma, when a storm is like, when's it going to turn to the right? Is it going to go on the east side of Florida, west side of Florida, or right through the middle of Florida? The glancing tracks, when it's coming in parallel to the shore, that's got to drive those guys crazy to try to figure out when and where. At least with Laura, it was pretty easy to forecast where it was going to hit. With Sally, not so much. Sally was having this interaction with bigger forces than the hurricane itself, and it was being pulled to the right all the time. Initially it was thought it was going to come in around the Pearl River, and then, Biloxi Gulfport, and then maybe Mobile, and Gulf Shore. So it kept on being pulled to the east, and that makes a huge difference when you're trying to prepare for a storm and all these cities trying to take action. It's really kind of frustrating at a time to try to forecast these things.
Oh yeah, those ones that run up the East Coast, like Isaias did earlier this year and Irene back in 2011, it lights up every emergency management office to Maine, and every one of them have a different concern, and the unique thing on there, they're different. So again, the Gulf, you have a lot of cross-track error to concern with. Also, usually the ones going up the East Coast, it's a speed. You lose track of, if you lose track of the speed, the models don't speed it up quick enough as it's heading into the westerlies. People start losing time right away on making their plans to evacuate and whatnot.
And then there's the intensity forecast. Try to forecast intensity, even just a matter of just a day or two in advance. I mean, Sally, I was really kind of reluctant to go because maybe it was about a 40% chance that it would be Cat 1. And then all of a sudden it intensifies right near the coast to be Cat 2. So it's like, wow, that's I never saw that coming.
Yeah, both Laura and Sally give me great ammunition as to why decision makers that have to pull the plug 48 hours in advance should add a category to the forecast because of uncertainty. We're just not that good. Plus or minus a category is within the skill level of forecasting at that time frame.
Yeah, and 48 hours, as you know, is not a whole lot of time to prepare on these things, especially if you're dealing with a fairly sizable community and getting things ready. and getting people out of there, evacuation zones and the like, to think about adding another category of just, again, probability there. It's possible this thing could be actually stronger. That would be very challenging, to say the least.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just the meteorological science, but the social science that follows. You've got to figure out where it's going to go, what it's going to do, and then figure out how to convey that message. And that's got to be as much of a challenge as anything, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, you have to stage all of these aftermath. The power crews, where are they going to go? The people with the cell service, where are they going to go? So they have to go somewhere, and you don't want to be in harm's way. I've heard where, for Charlie, for example, I had several friends of mine that evacuated the coast and went to Orlando and thought, oh, I'm going to go to Orlando, nothing's going to happen there. And guess what happened? Charlie comes in, takes a right hook, and ends up going through Orlando.
Yeah, Charlie was a 15-mile wide tornado.
Yeah, the damage swath, and I surveyed Charlie. The damage swath from Charlie was very narrow, very confined, but it was like a knife that cut through from the southwest to the northeast in Central Florida.
That was another one that gave forecasters fit, because it was going, when it was still on Cuba, the best estimate of the forecast track was very parallel to the coast, eventually grazing the coastline at Tampa, and everybody got fixated on that point on the map, and they talk about a sharp, unexpected turn. Well, it was just a small turn, a little more northeast instead of northeast to northeast, and it made a very big difference on where on the coast it went inland.
Exactly. My target was Tampa, and Tampa got nothing. So it was like those chasers who went down to Port Charlotte, they got something memorable down there.
Inquiring minds want to know what your travel plans are for the Texas coast for the next 7 days.
Hey, I'm like you guys. I'm watching the Gulf, and I'm going to see what's going to happen there. I always like it when it's closer to home, the storm chase. It gets a bit difficult. Irma was probably my most difficult chase because the power was out for almost all of the western part of Florida, and I could not get fuel all the way from, I would say, Tallahassee on down to Naples. Fortunately, I had 55 gallons of extra fuel with me. I don't normally carry that much, but I anticipated that would happen, and I used every drop trying to get out of there.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it comes this way, I invite you to come by the house and take pictures of my shutters and everything. And then in the aftermath, I'll have evidence that an engineer looked at them.
There you go. Consider it done. Let's try to steer the hurricane towards your house, right?
It won't happen because I left all but my front porch and back porch. All the other shutters are still on. Therefore, we won't get a storm. If I put them all away, we'd get one.
I wonder if your neighbors get concerned, Bill, when you start putting shutters up on your windows.
I know mine do.
Yeah, it doesn't cause a panic. They just wonder, is it really going to come here? And I explain to them, I put them on a day earlier than most do, mainly because I don't put them on very often. I just want to make sure they work. And if I've got a problem, that'll give me a day to try to work around it.
Okay, good idea.
Good plan. Good plan. So during, I don't know what hurricane it was when I first bought my plywood to put up. And again, I'm 70 miles inland and we're in pretty good shape, but the guy that put it up wrong, used nails and nailed it in. I had a guy do it for me because I was working. He nailed it to the bricks. And so I came back home and took it down and bought my ply locks. And the next weekend I put it back up because I was making it fit, doing it right. And all the neighbors were taking theirs down when I'm putting mine back up. And there was a lot of concern in the neighborhood that there was another storm coming, even though there was nothing out there because I was putting mine up. So the neighbors do watch, Bill. I know they do watch. Yeah. Yeah. Casper Gregory just says, thanks for the great information. He says, excellent information, presentation as always. Greatly appreciate your time and sharing of your experiences. And I think we all echo that, Tim. Great job today.
Well, thank you so much, guys. Thanks for the invite. It's been fun.
Yeah, now you can go take a nap.
I'm going to do just that.
I will have you back on sometime. You share some pictures and share some of the more knowledge that you've gained from this season. And hopefully this next system out there won't bother anybody. You won't have any pictures to share from what may be Wilfred in the days ahead.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Bill, as always, thanks. Any final thoughts, Bill?
Nope, everything's humming along. It's nothing new came in the hour or so we've been talking, so we'll just have to wait and see.
All right. Thanks all our viewers who tuned in today. We also want to thank our sponsors once again, Plylock, Hurricane Clips, USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau. And Tim, for your hard work in the mail today will be your very own NTWC Live face mask. So you'll have that to wear with you on your next chase, unlike the people in the stores in Alabama, right? All right. Thank you all for being with us today. Alex, final thoughts from you.
Well, again, thanks, Tim. That was a great show with you and lots of really interesting information there. Thanks so much for being with us today. And we're looking forward to talking to Mark Senna next week. He's going to be talking about his adventures in these hurricanes, putting down these surge cams. And then we have Eric Dolan. Now, Eric is the author. We'll bring Tim back up there, of Furious Sky. And he will be talking to us about his book, A Furious Sky, the 500-year history of American hurricanes. So until then, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.